is not to empower families or expand opportunities for all, but to defend the status quo. In cities like Washington, D.C., district charter collaboration has led to improved outcomes and opportunities for children across the spectrum. So children in charter schools, children in private schools, and children in traditional district schools. When adults put children first, extraordinary things can and do happen. A measure of a school that is working, and I was fortunate enough to work in one of these schools, is one where the kids arrive early and stay late, not because they have to, but because they want to. It's a school where teachers call home, not only because a student might be late, but also because that student aced their spelling test, or because they did something kind for a classmate with whom they once sparred. It's a school where fourth graders salivate over the next novel on the reading list because they've developed such a strong passion for reading, the places it can take them, and the characters they relate to. These are the schools that families will choose because they are the schools where children will learn. Tell a parent about such schools, and in my experience, that parent will care less about the school's label, charter, district, or private, and more about whether or not it's an option for her child. I've lived in New Orleans, in DC, and New York City, and these three cities are doing school choice better than many in the country, and people look to them as an example of what works. So, when I came back to Omaha in 2011, I had this idea that Omaha needed charter schools. But if you'd asked me then whether I supported school vouchers or private school choice, I cringe to think I would have said no. So, I want you to think about that with me for a minute. Here I am, a child whose family moved from one suburban Omaha school to another, again for a specific program that my siblings needed, and someone who attended a private high school. And by this point, I knew not only that a lot of kids are stuck in failing schools, but I actually knew some of these kids and families. I had witnessed up close the devastation aligned with the absence of a high-quality education. And yet, knowing all of these things and living as I had, I was going to tell parents of lesser means that they should have fewer choices rather than more, or more accurately, that they should have another choice, but it should be limited by my beliefs about what's best for a system rather than their beliefs about what's best for their child. I've never met a parent who says, I wish I didn't have that choice for my son. Or that says, maybe if I just had fewer choices, I would have found a school that works best for my daughter. That's why choice programs continue to grow across the country despite the political hurdles and entrenched special interests fighting them every step of the way. So I had this idea once that once people understand that this is working for kids and how certain policies result in wins for families, we can move faster, we can open more high-quality schools, we can close or transform those that aren't working, we can ensure every child has access to an effective educator and a love for learning. Unfortunately, that hasn't proven true yet. The opponents' arguments simply shift. It used to be charter schools don't work. Then it was charter schools don't do any better than the district schools. Then it was they do better, but for reasons or supposed reasons we don't agree with. Then it was not every charter school is right for every child, which, ironically, is the argument school choice proponents have been making all along. Most recently, the messaging in Nebraska has been this: we don't need more choices for poor families because the choices available to middle and upper income families are pretty good. And this entire time, while the charter school movement is growing and improving and increasingly in higher demand, we're talking around the real issue, which is how much we value adult interest at the expense of what's best for kids. And I'm going to admit something to you. I am an adult. I have interest. But they shouldn't trump a child's interest when it comes to a system that exists exclusively, in theory, for the benefit of children and the future prosperity of this country. And so with that, in conclusion, I urge you to do the research on this issue. I don't have time to tell you all I would if I could and if you wouldn't get bored. And also, I hope you'll ask questions. Ask them of your elected officials, ask them of your friends and neighbors. And when you ask those friends, consider whether they were able to choose the school through tuition or moving to the neighborhood that they live in. And I hope you really will do this, ask questions of a parent whose only option today is a school that is failing her child. Ask her whether every child in every zip code deserves a high quality education. So I look forward to listening to what Anne has to say and then hopefully answering some questions. Thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much to the Omaha Press Club, to Katie for participating today, and you all for attending. My name's Ann Hunter-Pirtle. I'm the Executive Director and founder of Stand for Schools, and our mission is to advance public education in Nebraska. I'm here because I'm the product of a Nebraska public education, from kindergarten all the way through my master's degree, actually first grade, check that, started kindergarten in Kansas. But that education allowed me to do what I wanted to do in the world, and I'm committed to making sure that every Nebraska child gets that same opportunity. Overall, Nebraska has excellent public schools, boasting the 5th highest high school graduation rate in the country at 88.9%, the highest ACT score among states where a majority of students take that exam, and the 7th highest college going rate in the country, among other achievements. So I want to be very clear that on the whole, Nebraska's public schools are succeeding. They are the lifeblood of our communities, and we should be very proud of them and what they do. But that said, even a good system is not perfect, and there are schools in our state that need significant improvement. Those challenges are falling, as Katie pointed out, disproportionately on the shoulders of our most vulnerable students, which are low-income students, new immigrants, and racial minorities, and that is not acceptable. And so we're going to focus a lot of the discussion today on the relative handful of schools in our state, particularly in Omaha, that are struggling, and that's appropriate. We should focus our time and attention on the schools and students that need it most. But we shouldn't take this discussion to mean that our public schools are failing or that we can't fix the challenges we do face. The question before us today isn't, are charter schools good or bad? It's what strategies are proven to help us meet the educational challenges we face here in Nebraska. And what's proven, what works best over and over, is investing the time, energy, and resources into supporting what's working in our public schools while fixing what's not, as opposed to giving up and defunding them. So what charter schools are is they're schools that take public tax dollars but lose the transparency and oversight of an elected school board. And instead, they put those taxpayer dollars into the hands of a private board of directors, whether in a nonprofit or for-profit entity, which typically have far fewer transparency requirements than publicly elected school boards do. And as Katie pointed out, there's some debate as to whether charter schools are public schools or not. Last year, the National Labor Relations Board actually ruled that they are not public schools. In the case of a couple of labor disputes involving schools in, I believe it was Pennsylvania, the National Labor Relations Board ruled that charter schools are in fact government contractors, private contractors, as opposed to public schools. And the reason that matters is because of their structure and the fact that they're taking public dollars and putting them into private hands. School choice sounds great, but it comes with consequences. And that's something that its proponents don't always point out. The way that charter schools and vouchers are typically funded is that each student is assigned a dollar amount that is to follow them to any school of their parents' choosing, which means that dollar amount is being taken away from the public school that they would have attended and shifting to a private entity, whether a charter school management organization or a private school in the form of a voucher. The problem there is that the public school's costs stay just about the same. If you lose one student out of a class, you still need the same number of teachers. You still need the same size building. It's not as though an entire third grade class is likely to transfer out of a charter school, allowing one teacher to follow them or to leave the school. So, we're not saving money through school choice, but we are costing our public schools something. And our public school students in many states that have charter schools and vouchers are getting left in the dust. In addition, I want to point out that charter schools do get to select their students, and that's a problem. I don't doubt for a minute that the charter school that Katie worked at in New York City was great, but charter schools typically require an application, and even with the best of intentions, that application is a bar that some families can't clear. If you've got a parent who's working 3 jobs to make ends meet, or someone who doesn't speak English when the application is only available in English, already you're leaving out a whole population of kids. And some charter schools don't have students' interests in mind. One particularly egregious example is Greenwood's Charter School outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I believe this was in 2014. At Greenwood's, the application to attend the charter school was not available online. It was not available even in person at the school. It was available one night a year at a private golf club, miles outside the Philadelphia suburbs, not accessible by public transportation. Not surprisingly, Greenwoods had the lowest percentage of students eligible for free and reduced lunch of any school in Philadelphia. Now, when that practice, which is illegal by the way, was uncovered, the state could have closed that charter school, but they didn't. They got a little slap on the wrist, said you need to reform your application process, make it more equitable and more accessible. But the school didn't close. That's one example, but there are thousands across the country to show that there is a range in not only in the results of charter schools, but in their intentions. The NAACP last October voted in favor of a national moratorium on charter schools, saying that they have not lived up to their promises and that they prey in particular on neighborhood schools and minority communities. Regardless of your thoughts on charter schools or vouchers, the fact is that more than 90% of children in this country still attend public schools. And so we have to find ways to make them work for all students. The good news is, in Nebraska and in Omaha, we're well on our way to doing just that. We've had 25 years where charter schools have existed in some other states where they've run the experiments for us. We can see what works and what doesn't when it comes to charter schools. And we can take what's best from charter schools and implement them in our public schools here in Nebraska. This isn't an experiment we need to run on the kids in the state, risking putting our public tax dollars in private hands and risking some of the less well-intentioned consequences that we've discussed so far. So a great example is Kennedy Elementary right here in Omaha. Kennedy is part of the 75 North Community Redevelopment Program. And what Kennedy did is really interesting. They've taken a model partly based on a charter school in Atlanta, including having a longer school day and a longer school year. They've worked with the local teachers union to negotiate a different contract for teachers in that building to work those longer hours because they're interested in serving kids in this way. We're able to take the best of charter schools and put it into our public schools. And with that in mind, there is no ceiling on what public schools in Nebraska can achieve. I also want to note that Omaha Public Schools has some really aggressive school improvement plans in place in some of the lowest income elementary schools in the city that are making huge gains. Druid Hill Elementary School was on what they call priority status, in that the state intervened in that school along with OPS itself to improve test scores and improve the culture there. In fact, there was a World Herald article covering this just last week, so take a look at that. But this year, Druid Hill is being removed from state priority status. Their